It's Tuesday, the 1st of December 2009, and this is David Talbot, and I'm interviewing Mrs. Joyce Deane for the Second World War Experience Centre in Leeds. The interview is taking place at Joyce's Surrey home. Now, Joyce joined the WAAF in 1940 straight from school, and after some initial training was sent to Digby near Lincoln as a plotter, and worked both there and at its ground control interception stations. Late in 1942 she was sent for officer training, followed by posting to North Weald and its GCIs, which were more advanced than previously. Initially a supervisor, Joyce then became an interceptor controller for Spitfires from North Weald. A further posting near to Fighter Command HQ at Bentley Priory involved a variety of jobs, these all coming under a general programme of training which continued that winter near Luton. So when fully trained as a qualified controller, Joyce was posted to Trimley and gained some experience of actually being airborne. Now after D-Day, this was the time when flying bombs were plotted when they crashed down. It was Arnhem and its associated air armada were also well remembered. And by comparison, I think service after VE Day must have been a great anticlimax for demob in early 1946. Joyce will, I'm sure, tell me at the end of the interview what she feels her service taught her. But first of all, Joyce, after this rather lengthy introduction, could you give me some very brief personal and family pre-war background? When and where were you born?
I was born in Hampstead, London, but moved to Colchester in Essex when I was about 3, I think. And I went to Colchester County High School from the age of 8 to 18, which seems rather a long time in one school.
And did you enjoy that?
Yes, I did. I liked school.
You stayed on into the sixth form?
Yes.
And what did you enjoy about school particularly? The work, the friends, the games?
Well, everything. I was good at games, so that is always an advantage, I think, in schools. Tennis and hockey. And we played against other schools.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
No, I'm an only child, which I always rather regretted.
What about your father? What did he do? What was his profession?
He was an engineer. My mother was in the First World War as an intelligence officer.
So, both of them presumably were a bit too old to be called up for
war
service in the sector.
Yes. No, my mother was 38 when she had me.
Right. Now, I've been lucky enough to read an article which was condensed by Wartime News based on something that was originally put on a BBC WW2 People's War Memories website. So I do know, as you can gather from the introduction, a little bit about you, but tell me, why did you choose the WAAF first of all? Or did they choose you?
No. I chose the WAAF because I'd always been interested in aeroplanes. Used to rush to the window if something was flying overhead. So I thought that would be very interesting.
And what about the initial training? Were the girls much the same sort of background as you, or was there a great culture shock?
There was a bit of a culture shock. When I joined up at West Drayton, I was immediately had to sleep in a hut of 30 other girls, which I wasn't, of course, used to, and walking along to the ablutions hut. But I got used to it. I had to.
Did they do some form of trade test at the end of your initial training, or did they just say, right, we want so-and-so and so-and-so jobs?
No, when I was first joined up, I was offered either driving or clerk special duties, and I had no idea what clerk special duties was, but I opted for it.
Could you drive by then?
Well, I had passed my test, yeah, but I didn't really want to drive large lorries.
So clerk special duties, I mean, it could have been anything really, couldn't it? It could have been just working in some office.
Yes, I had no idea what to expect. It was all rather a shock when went to the first training place, and we stayed in what had been a home for elderly people, and we were on the first floor, and the only entrance was up an iron staircase, and it was all rather primitive.
Including the ablutions.
Including the ablutions, when they had little lead bowls over the wash basins, chained to the wall. But that was only for staying the night. We had to march to another building for training to be a plotter. And the ops room there was a replica of fighter command, and we were told that if fighter command had been bombed, we would have had to have taken over. But as fighter command was about 80 feet down in the ground, I don't think that was likely.
So that was your initial trade training, as it were, and then presumably you're posted for actual operational work.
Yes, that's right. I was originally posted to North Weald, but the day before I was meant to go, an alarm went off, and there was a direct bomb on WAAF headquarters there, and so my posting was cancelled, and I went to Digby near Lincoln instead.
A bit safer than North Weald at that time.
That's right, North Weald, yes, was being bombed.
The North Weald's 11 group, presumably, with Digby's 12 group.
That's right, yes, that's correct.
So, very little training before you were actually doing a job.
No, it was only a week's training for plotting, and the building we were in was extraordinary because it was covered with camouflage netting, and there were trees sticking out of the netting and lambs, so it looked quite like a hill with lambs prancing about. But it turned out to be the radar headquarters and was very secret, so we only marched to the ops room and not allowed to walk anywhere else in the building.
Well, that was before going to Digby, presumably.
This is before, yes.
Yeah. Now tell me a bit about Digby. It's inland, of course, so what sort of plotting were you doing, and how was it you were able to plot?
Well, the plotting table actually covered southeast England. There was a grid map on it, and large squares had an alphabetical letter, but that was broken up into numbers on the grid system within the large square. And we were getting plots that were coming over the sea, and so that we were plotting 100 bombers coming up the Thames and bombing London and Kent. So we knew what was going on.
But you couldn't, I gather you couldn't really understand to begin with why you were getting these plots from so far distance over the sea.
No, that's right.
You were first there.
How were we getting plots over the sea? We weren't told at first, but after, I think, a couple of months, we heard about the radar chain all down the east and south of England, and that explained because they could pick up the blips from the bombers as they left the French coast, so that we had time to scramble aircraft to be at Dover as the bombers arrived. If we hadn't had the radar chain, we wouldn't have had that early warning, and we didn't have sufficient aircraft to patrol over Kent all the time, so that aircraft were only scrambled when needed.
And were you actually on duty when there was this notorious raid on Coventry?
Yes, I just happened to be on the line from the Observer Corps, and we were warned about the bombing beforehand at Coventry, but only 2 hours before, when the RAF sergeant supervisor came and stuck sticky plaster up across the country to Coventry, and that was the expected course that the bombers would take. So we did have information that they were coming, and they did. 2 hours later they came, and the man in the Observer Corps at Coventry said he was sitting ankle deep in water. And we didn't have GCI then, so we didn't have coverage that their coverage only came via the radar, which was called RDF then, Radio Direction Finding. It was the Americans that named it radar.
So it's whilst you're at Digby that it then gets its own ground control interception stations. Is that right?
Yes, it was, can't remember exactly, but it was towards the end of 1940, or it might have been the beginning of
early 41.
Yes, it could have been. But I was, the plotters from Digby in turn were sent in pairs to the radar stations, GCI, at Orby, and you did about 6 weeks working there, and then either you kept or you were returned to Digby, and I stayed.
What about your living conditions then? Where did you live?
We all lived in silly villas scattered through the village, and I was quite on the edge, so it was quite a long walk into the local square where the transport was, and going on night duty on my own, I had to walk in the dark. It must have been getting on for a mile, and there were fields on either side with cows suddenly looming out of the darkness and mooing at me, which I didn't like very much.
And you must have been there then during the winter of 41, 42. I imagine it was pretty cold work, wasn't it?
It was extremely cold. Yes, I was only there.
Was it warm in your station, or was it cold outside?
No, everything was cold. There was no heating anywhere, and the trailer where we walked was about the size of a small caravan, and there were steps up to it. It was raised off the ground, and the aerial was turned by 2 airmen pedaling on a fixed bicycle. There was no electric power to turn the aerials. The one advantage was that we had a telephone line to the airman, and we could stop the aerial if we wanted a good view of one particular aircraft blip. But it was extremely cold. I mean, any water. We did have, we had electricity in the rest house and an electric kettle, but the water in it used to freeze.
And I gather the basis of this was the 2 cathode ray tubes, which enabled you to do your job.
Yes, they were like a tiny television set. It was a round screen with the aerial going around through 60 degrees, and as it hit something, the light was brighter, but it only lasted for a few seconds, so you had to be pretty quick. And the blip then was not just a dot, it was crescent-shaped, like a new moon, and you had to, the actual plot was in the middle of the inner edge of this sort of banana shape. And if aircraft were going north-south, the blips really merged. It was very difficult to tell in which direction or how close the aircraft were.
But you could get the height and range from it.
Well, there were 2 tubes in a huge console which took up all 3/4 of the width of the caravan. And there were 2 tubes, and they had a fluorescent covering inside the tube which made it glow. But there were, at sort of seating level, there were 2 people, one looking at the PPI, which is planned position indicator, and the other one gave heights. And there you had 2, at the level horizontal trace, and when an aircraft was hit, you got 2 little lines shooting down, because from 2 aerials, and sometimes it was 1/2 inch, sometimes only 1/4 inch, and you had to work out the ratio between the two lines, which was very difficult, and then read off a graph which actually gave you the height.
So compared with what you experienced later in the war, it's very, very, very primitive.
Yes, it was. And it faded quite a lot.
And I suppose when you were transferred to the second GCI, it was a similar principle, was it?
Well, when I was transferred to Staithorpe, that was, yes, exactly the same. And we were in civvy billets in Southall, and they allowed a train to stop to allow us to get out, because the GCI was actually on Rollston Racecourse. We had to sort of walk across this field, really, where the weeds were high. At night it was very difficult to see where you were going.
Were you actually in charge of this particular thing? Was that you were promoted to corporal?
Yes, I was a corporal then, and there were only 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 people actually working in the trailer, and then there'd be a mechanic who was on call and a controller, and then there was an admin sort of shed which would be in line with the trailer, because we didn't want buildings near the GCI, because that would give a reading back and confuse the picture on the radar.
So again, you're very much out on a limb in this trailer, although it doesn't sound quite as frightening as the first trailer, as far as the journey to it's concerned.
Well,
you do mention in the printed account something about very high weeds around it.
Well, yes, it was quite difficult, because the train wasn't stopping at a station. It was just stopping in the track, and we had to climb a high gate to get in. And with barbed wire along it, and I think I tore my skirt.
Now, why was it, I wonder, that you were then selected for OPTU? Was it your idea, or was it their idea?
Well, there was one job in the ops room at Digby that I would like to have done. This was a commission job where there was sort of a liaison between the controller and the squadrons, and control the tannoy. And I thought, well, I'd quite like to do that. So I saw the squadron leader who was in charge in Orby and said, do you think I could apply for a commission for that job? He said, no, but if you wait a few months, I will recommend you for a job, because we're now building large radar stations and we shall need people, and I will recommend you for that. And in fact he did, 6 months later, which I was quite surprised.
You didn't have to pass any interview before getting on to the OPTU?
Oh yes, we did. We had to go to the Air Ministry for an interview, and then we had 2 days of testing where we were interviewed by a psychiatrist, and we were put through some tests that the pilots were put through. Like, for example, one I remember most is there'd be a map on a blackboard of a town with shops, and we were given a bit of paper, and we were told we had so much money, and George and Mary had to go shopping for the butchers for so much meat, and they spent so much money, so you had to subtract that from the money you'd taken, and then they'd suddenly say, write down the name of 3 flowers beginning with the letter D. And you carried on going around this town deducting money and being interrupted with questions. And that was very difficult. And we were told later that people only got about 40%. And it was the same test the pilots did.
But anyhow, you got through this, and you went on to the course, which I gather briefly was at Loughborough, but principally after 2 weeks you moved to Lake Windermere to Bowness.
That's right. Yes, that was the last 4-week OPTU.
Did you enjoy that, or was it a bit
of a
bore, really?
Well, we started at Loughborough. We were there for a fortnight, and then they had a train, and they moved everybody to Lake Windermere, where nobody had seen any WAAF before. So they all came out to have a look. And we were in the Ye Olde England Hotel. and there were about 6 of us in a bedroom on there were bunk beds sort of against the 3 walls. There were bunk beds.
Luxury, or
No, it wasn't, because they hadn't moved in the cooking staff, so we had to help with the washing up. And it was winter and snow on the ground. We had to march in the car park that was covered in snow. And we had no time to explore anywhere, and anyway, no means of getting around, no transport. But it was enjoyable, but quite scary.
And you say this was the admin side of being an officer. I don't know what sort of things they were teaching you there. Do you remember?
Well, the sort of rules, what you should do, like who you should salute. And the thing that annoys me in films these days, they show people saluting without a cap on, and you can't salute without a cap on. I think the Americans do that. But anyway, I passed on the last morning, as we came out of the dining room after breakfast. Some people were touched on the shoulder and told to go and pack. The rest of us went into the lecture hall, and the ones that had failed we never saw again. They were packed and gone by the time we came out of the lecture hall.
So it was done in a fairly tactful way, in other words, would you say?
Well, I suppose you could look upon it like that, but if you made any friends in that short time, you lost contact.
I mean, you never had any contact with anybody from that course subsequently, presumably?
No. Well,
either they failed or they were scattered far and wide to different postings.
Well, exactly, and we were posted to different places.
And this is when you went for the first time finally to North Weald, where you'd almost gone before.
That's right. Yes, gone full circle. But the way we got our uniforms was interesting, because a few days before the end of the course, London shops came up, and there was a sort of market with stalls, and you could go and choose which place to go to, like, oh dear, I've forgotten the names. But anyway, there were London shops, and then they measured you, and they half made up a uniform, so that if you failed, they could still turn it to fit somebody else. And if you passed, you then had to go down to London to the final fitting and collect it. And we had a fortnight leave to do all that in.
That sounds very nice. Well, I had no idea that they were individually fitted, these uniforms.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
Yes, far better material than I had previously.
Well, let's go on to North Weald, and of course the GCI at Trimley Heath that was associated with it. Where did you work? Did you work in the GCI at Trimley Heath, or were you mainly at North Weald itself?
No, I went to North Weald. There were just 2 of us posted to North Weald, and we were in the ops room, and we were meant really just be taught about the ops room, but we already knew, having worked in one. But it was very interesting, because at the time that we were bombing the rocket sites on the Pas-de-Calais, and we had 2 squadrons of Norwegian pilots, and they were going off every day bombing, and we were set to work out the courses that they had to fly to rendezvous with the American flying fortresses, I think. And we had an instrument called a Dalton computer. Well, it wasn't a computer as you use the word today. It was just a little handheld instrument with dials and compasses on, which you had to set, because as a plane climbs, the wind direction and strength changes, so you have to trim your course to allow for this, so that you have a course, and then what you actually fly is a track, and so it's really like a triangle.
So were you actually doing this, or were you supervising other people doing this?
Well, no, the two of us were working it out, and then we were taken to dispersal. So we heard the pilots being told what their mission was, and then the two of us, we were lucky, very lucky. We were taken to the end of the runway to see all these Spitfires take off. Two squadrons, 3 at a time, one in the middle and 2 on the grass, one on the runway and 2 on the grass. And then they would form up overhead and fly off, 2 squadrons. And it was the most wonderful sight. And the weather was good then. But after that...
and they were acting as cover for the bombers.
That's right.
These rockets.
That's right.
Obviously.
Yes, you're right. And they were very successful when it was necessary. And I mean, if they hadn't been bombed, and if you think that the flying bombs had come 10 days earlier than they did, that would have been when all the troops were being amassed round the coast, ready for D-Day. And the war might have been very different.
I'm not totally clear, Joyce, whether this was part of your training or whether you were doing an operational role yourself.
Not really. I did occasionally answer a pilot that called up for help, but it really was training, yes.
Because you do go on to say that you had further training at a private house called Woodland,
That's right. That was quite extraordinary, because they turned a large room into a kind of ops room, a sort of cross between Stanmore and Uxbridge, and the whole thing was laid out just exactly as if it was a working ops room, and it had telephone lines out to the garden where we had Wall's ice cream vans with a shield put in front and a slit in it, and we had to take turns in bicycling on this Wall's ice cream bicycle, and we received messages on headphones, and we had a metronome that we cycled to the time of, so that if we were told to fly faster, we could. And if you could then see through the slit and see an airman who was walking around being a bomber, that was tally-ho. But this was in winter, and there was snow on the ground, and one Wall's ice cream turned right over. But it was all very serious and taken very seriously, and I suppose it was a good introduction.
And you were still having lectures and things like this.
Oh yeah. Oh,
it
was just like being back at school. Every course ended with a test.
It's very intensive training, this, isn't it? You were in 3 different places, in fact, because the third one you say at GCI at East Hill, Luton, was the least enjoyable of your bits of training.
That was very difficult. There were only about 10 of us, I think, 2 WAAF and some RAF men, and I think there was an American. Yes, there were three Americans as well. And at first we were doing sort of practice interceptions. Then we had the real thing, but the pilots that we were actually controlling, they in fact were under training themselves, which made working out a course frightfully difficult, because you couldn't tell whether the pilot would take 2 miles to turn or 6 miles to turn. And if he took that amount of time, he would never catch up the bomber. And it was also a very constricted area in which to fly, because we were so near London, and we couldn't go into London, because anything lower than 20,000 feet would have been shot at by the guns.
How would your instructors know whether it was your fault or the pilot's fault if they weren't doing what they were told? Was it possible to tell from?
No, well, I don't think it really. Well, the people, the instructors were just sitting behind us, watching what we were doing. So they would be able to tell. But no, they wouldn't have had any idea of how long the pilot was going to take in doing a turn onto another course. You were meant to use 3 instructions. When a hostile was picked up on the radar, you turned in that direction, and then you did another turn which was more accurate, and finally you had a 3rd course to give, which would bring the fighter in behind the bomber. And of course, if you managed to get your fighter in front of your bomber, we were in trouble. So it was all very, it meant a very quick reaction to tell when to give the right order.
Did everybody get through this part of the course all right?
And no, they didn't. The 3 Americans who came from Alabama and had a very strong accent, they were so slow in giving their orders to turn that they all 3 were failed, and they'd gone before we ever saw.
North Weald, or in fact in Trimley it would be, wouldn't it?
Yes.
You were a fully qualified controller.
That's right.
As a result of this course. And,
Yes.
Presumably also your living conditions were better than they had been before, were they?
Yes, when first I was at Trimley as a supervisor, I lived on a farm, and we had to cycle to work, and it was jolly hard coming off duty at night when it was black and cycling along a country road and then into a farm. I nearly landed up in the pond once. But no, this time, when I was finally back there as a controller, we had 2 houses. One house for the men and where we ate, and then a little house just around the corner where the WAAF slept.
And it was round about this time that you at last got experience of going up in an aircraft, albeit of course as a passenger. Did you enjoy that?
Well, it was a bit scary because we went up in a Beaufighter, 2 of us, and we had to stand on the escape hatch, and we didn't have a parachute, but we weren't flying that high, so I don't suppose a parachute would have helped. But it was a bit cloudy, and yes, that was a bit scary. Then I was taken up in an Anson when I was at North Weald, and at Trimley we went up in
Lysander.
That's right, Lysander, to see what Trimley station looked like from the air.
Were they very noisy inside, these aeroplanes, or uncomfortable, or?
Well, very uncomfortable, because when I was at North Weald, a Lancaster bomber made an emergency landing there, and I was taken over to see it, and it was so cold, there was nothing really to protect you at all. And across the floor, they had scattered window, which were strips of metallic, cut to the length of a German wavelength.
Yes, you showed
and those were used to confuse the picture on the
on their radar.
That's right.
Yes.
Mind you, they did the same to us as well.
Indeed, yes. And of course, we're coming up to the time of D-Day now, aren't we? Presumably.
Yes.
Chronologically.
Just a few days before D-Day, we've actually about 4 of us had gone to the pictures in Felixstowe, and suddenly our names were flashed up on the screen, telling us to return to base. And the RAF officers were given guns, and they had to protect the admin office because we'd just received the book. What's it called? I've forgotten.
Well, Overlord.
Overlord
was
book.
the key.
That's right. Which Overlord, and it gave the description. I didn't see it. No, I wish I had, because I gather it gave information about the whole.
Because there must have been a heck of a lot of activity around, even though you're not on the south coast. The ships were still going from Felixstowe as part of the D-Day Armada, weren't they?
Well, a few days before, we discovered that the road from Ipswich to Felixstowe had pegs at intervals all the way down the entire road. And a couple of days later, that road was filled with army vehicles, tanks, and there they all sat. They had their emergency rations, and as D-Day was postponed a day because of the weather, by the time they got on a boat in the docks at Felixstowe, they'd already eaten their emergency rations.
Because of the delay, yeah.
Yes, and we controlled some pairs of Spitfires that flew to and fro, and oh no, that was for Arnhem. We controlled those,
well,
but yes, that was for Arnhem later on. Yes.
Of course, you've got the hazard coming next of the V1s, the Doodlebugs, haven't you? Because they must have been a bit of a surprise to know what on earth they were on a screen, I should think.
Well, we were warned about 3 weeks before. We had information and pictures of what a Doodlebug would look like. And I think it was 10 days after D-Day. I was on duty, and it was early in the morning. We suddenly saw these plots coming up, actually on the plotting table. And a few minutes later, the plot had gone. And we suddenly realised that it was the flying bombs. And
if the plot had gone, it could have been for two reasons, presumably. Either they were shot down or they crashed, I suppose.
Well, they were shot down, some of them. They came over from they crossed the south coast going to London, and then they released them from German aircraft over the North Sea, and they came a direct line over Felixstowe, right over our heads. They did show on the radar as a little blip, but they were faster than our aircraft could fly. But the one thing you could tell them from an aircraft was that they were on a constant course. They were set on one course, and that's what they did until they crashed.
Did any crash in your immediate area?
Yes, one or two did, and I saw them coming over. They were quite attractive to look at. They had flames belching out the back. It looked like a sort of toy up in the air. But the moment that their engine cut out, they dive straight down. So once the noise they made stopped, you dive for cover. They were quite frightening.
And then you did just mention, we come on to it now, Arnhem. Presumably, when you were not inside, you did actually see some of the aircraft going physically over in that direction.
Yes, they went straight over our heads.
Yes.
Absolutely. So yes, you could see them, and they did show up on the radar.
But you had quite a job to do for one's coming back, presumably, or one's not quite making it in terms of the plotting.
I don't really.
I mean, you were involved in air sea rescue.
Well, we could call up a coastal command plane, which would drop dinghies to anybody that had dropped in the sea. And we had a walrus.
Through plotting or through wireless communication?
I think they were ordered up. Yes, some didn't come from Martlesham, and we did have a line to them. I can't remember who we called first now.
But anyhow, you did have a role to play in rescuing people who'd crashed.
Well, we had the ability. I can't remember quite what happened exactly, because there was a walrus that we could scramble from Martlesham, and that could land on the sea, provided the waves weren't too high.
Yeah. And that really, I suppose, was the last big excitement of the war for you, the Arnhem operation.
Yes, I suppose it was. Yes. Yes, we used to get information on how things were going, and I remember getting through Caen took much longer than had been expected.
Indeed, it was supposed to be taken on the first day.
Yes, I think it took about 6 weeks.
Indeed.
The Americans went round it, whereas we had to go through it.
Aware of what was going on very much.
Oh yes, yes, we were. And we had a map on the wall, and I had the job of keeping it up to date. So we were aware of all the difficulties.
And eventually, of course, we come to VE Day, and I don't know whether you were able to celebrate this very much.
No, we weren't. The CEO drove through the village hooting his horn, but no, we didn't have a party. We were completely out of alcohol. We did have alcohol in the mess, but sometimes we would run out completely, and sometimes in the winter there was no coal for fires. And now everything cost a ridiculously low price. The beer was, I think it was 9p half a pint, and a gin and tonic was 1 and 2p in old money, and which seems very little now.
But it wasn't then, obviously.
No, it wasn't then.
Yeah.
We were very badly paid.
And so with VE Day coming and going, your work was obviously much reduced, and I would think the rest of the service was a bit of an anticlimax, wasn't it, after that?
Well, I was sent on yet another course to Blackpool, for Squiresgate. So I was going to be transferred to Coastal Command. So I went through another course of weather, navigation, procedure, etc., with another exam at the end of it. And at the end of the 6 weeks, they didn't need anybody extra in Coastal Command. So I was transferred to admin, the record office in Gloucester, which was a bit dull. But I was on pay parade. I was meeting people whom I'd known as plotters years ago.
But they weren't officers?
No. The pay parade was when they were being paid. That their other ranks had to.
So really, you were quite pleased when DMOB came round.
Well, yes, because everything was becoming frightfully more official. Dining in nights and the civilian. No, not the civilian.
Now, are you grateful for having had this experience of being in the WAAF?
Oh yes, it was an extraordinary experience. So unbelievable. But I mean, it taught me an awful lot, because I was so young when I joined up, and it all came as a complete surprise, really.
Are you still in contact with anybody you served with by now, after all this time?
Well, I'm still in contact. I mean, there only were ever 30 WAAF interception controllers. That's all there were. And I did know 4. But there's only one left now, and she lives in Canada. But yes, I'm in contact with her, and she's over 90. But yes, I met a lot of people, and I was in contact with a lot. But
did you actually, on the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, did you actually march?
Yeah, well, yes. We had to assemble and birdcage walk, where there's a guards were based. And then yes, the men had a bit of a shock. Suddenly these slightly elderly ladies all appearing. I remember we went wandering around looking for the loo, and the soldiers looking very shocked.
A bit of a long wait, I should think.
Well, there was, yes, because we had to get there very early, and we were sent passers to get through. But then yes, I could have marched from Trafalgar Square up the Mall, but as I got a camera, I thought, no, I won't do that. But we did march from Birdcage Walk to outside Buckingham Palace, where we all stood, and the people were clapping us as we as we walked along. I was quite surprised, but yes, it was a very interesting experience.
What had you done in civilian life when you were demobbed? Did you meet your future husband in the war? Or
No, no, after the war.
So you had to get a job, presumably, did you?
Well, this is it. It was all a bit of a shock, really, Civvy Street, because here I was, 24, never been out of uniform all my life, because we didn't have any civilian clothes to wear ever. So I did a secretarial course, and then got a job. I think it was with an American film company. But in 1947 I got married.
So you met your husband sort of shortly after the war?
Yes, yes, I did. And I didn't know him during the war. There were very few Englishmen in England during the war. They were all abroad. And the country was full of Poles, Czechs, Danes, Norwegians.
Which was a fascinating experience to meet them, I'm sure, too.
Yeah, well, I did, yes. And I met one or two Americans. But,
and you feel, really, just in the final few words, that your service in the WAAF taught you a great deal that you might not have learned in civilian
yes,
life.
it did. It taught me a lot about people, in a way, how people react and
I suppose
how to deal with them.
Well.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
And you're looking at some additional notes that you made that maybe are things that are not on the printout from the website or the shortened article that I've read. So before I switch the tape off, is there anything else that you want to add that is vital? I know you've added one or two things.
It's not vital, but it's something that irritates me. When you see old war films and they're in an ops room and they're giving orders, they give the hostile aircraft as angels a certain height, whereas the word angels is actually an order to your pilot to go to a certain height.
They don't always get it right in the
No,
films.
And the other things are the people I met. Guy Gibson came round Digby ops room because he was one of the pilots flying over Coventry, and I remember him because he had a DFC then, and he stood just near me, and I had a good look at him. But after the dam busters raid, I think he must have gone on to Lancaster's from Beaufighter, but he was killed in a Mosquito, low flying over Europe later on. And I went to Biggin Hill on one of the courses, where there was Cat's Eye Cunningham, who used to fly over London at 20,000 feet. And then Douglas Bader, when he was came back, when he was released from the war camp, he was made group captain IC North Wales. And I happened to go down to North Wales for some reason, see an intelligence officer, I think, and he came and sat at my table having lunch. So that was interesting. And
did you form much of an impression of him from lunchtime?
No, not really. He wasn't talking much. And Rex Harrison, when I was at Stanmore, which is Fighter Command, he was on Air Sea Rescue, and the siren system, the air warning siren, was started in Stanmore and then passed on. And the reason why we were able to scramble aircraft so quickly, having received the plots on the radar, was because we had open telephone lines always manned, so that an enemy leaving the French coast, fighters could be scrambled within 2 minutes because there were all these telephone lines that were manned all the time. So that made it all possible.
Well, thank you for those extra bits and pieces, Joyce. I enjoyed hearing your reminiscences very much. Thank you very much.